Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church in Eugene, where empowered by love, we transform ourselves and serve our world. My name is Linda Krennicke, and my pronouns are she and her. With me today is our minister, Rev. Jen Youngsun, collaborative pianist Suzanne Giordano, vocalist Izzy Kreka and Bob Zarins, and UUCE Accessibility Task Force co-chair, Kitty Carlisle. And behind the scenes working tech is Kat Johnson. Welcome to this shared space of sacredness, this moment when we have gathered to be together and to love one another. We gather and worship to find meaning and live more deeply. Worship creates connections within, among, and beyond us, calling us to our better selves, calling us to live with wisdom and compassion. Whoever you are, we're glad you're here, whether it's your first time worshiping with us or your 1,000th. Welcome to anyone visiting today. We'd love to hear from you and invite you to fill out the visitor form as you feel called. The link is being dropped into the chat now. Our chalice lighting today are the words of Albert Schweitzer. At times, our own light goes out and is rekindled by a spark from another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lighted the flame within us.
From the chalice comes the flame that glimmers in the night and glows throughout the day in a blaze of inner light. Shine through the storm and sparkle in the rain, illuminates our world, the chalice and the flame.
Good Sunday morning, everyone. I am Rev Jen, and I use the pronouns she and her. I'm so happy to see all of you today, especially our neighbors from the Bend UU Church. They're here as our special guests and visitors. Glad you're here with us today. Let me call us to worship today with a video clip. This one is from a Christian nonprofit agency called Ability Ministries. And so some of the language they use in this video may not represent your spiritual path, but it is authentically theirs. You'll also notice that the use of gendered language, they use that kind of gendered language to speak about the divine, which is something that Unitarian Universalists no longer use. I hope that you will, though, get benefit from this video as I have. May the common language of love bridge any divide. Come, let us affirm the immutable soul, the enduring light in every person. Come, let us worship together.
Please join us in singing hymn number 95, There is More Love.
Keep
Barbara Crooker is a poet whose work has chronicled her life as a mother with a son on the autism spectrum. In her poem, 45 LPs, Crooker writes, "My autistic son listens to the oldies, digs that old time rock and roll, rhythm and blues. My husband says it's like our teen years are hanging out in his room, coming from the radio, when the night is dark and the land is far and the moon is the only light you see." What misfired neurons cause him to shake and fidget his fingers before his eyes, call out in class when the teacher's talking, be out of sync with everyone else? Up on the roof, it's peaceful as can be, and there the world below can't bother me. When we're gone, what then? What slot will he fit into like a quarter slipping in a jukebox for 3 plays? Slow songs you could dance to all night long. I'd like to introduce Kitty Carlisle, who is the co-chair of our fondly known ATF Committee Accessibility Task Force.
We all have those moments where that little light bulb goes on over our head and we suddenly see things in a different light. I had one sitting right there in the front row of UUCE several years ago. The service had just begun with Suzanne's beautiful music, and an older couple came through the east door. She was in a big electric wheelchair. He spotted a seat on the end of the middle aisle in the front row, and they made for that. He helped position her beside the seat and sat down. The response was immediate. Several greeters came over and said things about fire marshals and needing to keep the aisle open. The next thing anyone knew, they had spirited the woman away over to the side where there was no seat for her companion to sit, and they left him sitting in the seat. I could almost feel the heat of his anger and embarrassment throughout the service. They left quickly and I never saw them again. What I realized back then was that there were other options that day that would have preserved everyone's dignity. Asking other people in the row to move down and taking out a few seats to accommodate the wheelchair, or maybe escorting them to a seat where they both could sit together. My favorite solution would have been to have had designated places for wheelchairs throughout the sanctuary, acknowledging the fact that there will be people in wheelchairs. The point is, we can do better.
Thank you, Kitty. You're right. You're right, Kitty. We can do better. You know, people living with disabilities make up the largest minority population in the world. They number 15% of the global population, or about 1 billion people. And here in the US alone, more than 1 in every 4 persons live with a range of life-altering conditions, from mobility impairment and intellectual disabilities to chronic pain and mental health challenges. In an instant, everyone, everybody could find themselves identifying as a person with disabilities. But until that moment of impact, those who are temporarily able to easily separate themselves from that 1 billion by repeating the deception I am not that. That's ableism. Ableism, like all forms of oppression, privileges one group while minimizing another. And like other forms of oppression, the centering of able-bodied people has been codified into laws and policies, as well as practice patterns of behavior and thought. Disability has often been framed as something that's lacking, something that's sad or even tragic. In the years between the Civil War and World War I learned that local statutes popped up all across the land, and it outlawed the appearance of people who were, in the words of one of these laws, diseased, maimed, mutilated, or in any way deformed. Laws like this targeted people living at the intersection of poverty, homelessness, and visible disability. So I'm not sure about Eugene. I didn't have time to go into in-depth research about this, but I do know that in Portland, Oregon, in 1881, there was an ordinance on the books that referred to banning public exposure of deformity and unsightliness. A more recent example from 1986 shows the American Lutheran Church making a rule that says anyone with a disability could not be ordained into ministry. They said pastors are expected to be sufficiently able-bodied, ambulatory, and mobile in order to conduct their parish duties. Thankfully, this policy was overturned, and those local ordinances, like the one in Portland, are now gone. The underlying preference, though, for the able-bodied and the thought that disability is somehow wrong and undesirable, now that has been harder to change. But I can't think of a better place to do this kind of change work, this transformational work, than in our churches, in our fellowships, and in our congregations. And that's because it is in these communities that we have made vows. We have made sacred promises to care for one another. We've made promises to end oppression in its many forms and to fight for each other's liberation. We have committed to privileging bodies and voices and identities that have been historically marginalized. Now, that doesn't mean that we do it well all the time, but it does mean that when we fail, we don't give up. Biblical scholar Donald Gowen gives us a very powerful image of this kind of community. And when he was describing how the Israelites traveled together and cared for one another, he said that traveling in that wilderness as a community, they would place the most vulnerable groups, what Gowen called the culturally compromised, at the center, literally the center of their tribe, protected by a ring of their neighbors. Now, as we make tentative plans to safely come back together in our space, we have a tremendous opportunity to do things differently. Right now, the sanctuary is empty. And starting in that empty space, before we put one more chair back into that sanctuary, we can think first of those who have often gone last. This morning, I want to take a step back and make room for the voices of people who have experienced the impact of ableism in lots of different ways. People who know what it's like to be both very visible in our society and perplexingly invisible at the same time. So we've already heard from Kitty. Now let me read words from Natalie Maxwell, an advocate for special needs and adoptive families. She has witnessed firsthand where the church has failed its families and children. She says, some people look at our family through the eyes of pity. They see our children as burdens. Oh, but I wish I could get the church to understand that my children have helped me to free myself of the toxic burdens of ableism. My son has taught me that although I've always been able to walk, I was not always moving closer to God's heart. And my daughter, who is nonverbal, has taught me that words without love are empty vessels and they're void of purpose. Sometimes churches tell parents that their child cannot be in the children's program because they're too disruptive. But then when we take them to the sanctuary for worship, they're asked to leave the service because the child is being too loud. We trust you by putting our children in Sunday school. But then after numerous times of finding them sitting at a table by themselves while all the other kids are together, we get the message. We get the message that inclusion isn't really something that matters to you. The next person I'd like you to meet is Mia Mingus. I wish I could share all of her words with you because she's really brilliant, but that's going to have to wait for another sermon. For now, let me just share a few of Mia's sentences. Disability is not monolithic. Ableism plays out very differently for wheelchair users, deaf people, or people who have mental, psychiatric, cognitive disabilities. None of these are mutually exclusive, and they are all complicated by race, class, gender, immigration, sexuality, welfare status, incarceration, age, and geographic location. She continues, as a queer, disabled woman of color, disability justice feels like a political home for me, a place where I can engage in conversation about disability and race and gender and queerness and more. I imagine a world where our organizing and activism is less segregated, where our movements and communities are accessible and don't participate in the isolation of disabled communities. I imagine places where we fight for whole and connected peoples, families, and communities. UUCE's Accessibility Task Force is helping our church to be just the kind of place Mia imagines. You know, before I even met the members of this task force, I kind of assumed that the accessibility group was all about improving physical access to our church building. But just after a few minutes with them, I knew this was totally different. I heard from them a wider perspective for an activism that is interconnected, recognizing that people with disabilities come from all parts of the human families and therefore claim multiple identities. Those intersections hold both challenges and incredible opportunities for coalescing power. Here is David Oakes, the other co-chair of the Accessibility Task Force, to describe that vision in his own words.
Here's David Oakes, Accessibility Task Force co-chair at our Unitarian Universalist Church in Eugene community.
I'm proud we committed to dismantling racism and other oppressions.
I'm proud we committed to dismantling racism and other oppressions.
Other oppressions.
Other oppressions.
Ending ableism is everyone's issue.
Ending ableism is everyone's issue.
That can be a new ramp for our sanctuary. Thanks.
That can be a new ramp for our sanctuary. Thanks.
In a deeper way, other oppressions is how we treat the other.
In a deeper way, other oppressions is how we treat the other.
We need a united voice for all who are marginalized.
We need a united voice for all who are marginalized.
The climate crisis needs immediate action.
The climate crisis needs immediate action.
The disemboweled can transform our normality to serve our world with revolution.
The disempowered can transform our normality to serve our world with revolution.
Thanks from ATF. Contact access@uueugene.org or call the UUCE office.
We absolutely need a united voice because access and inclusion, they're just the beginning. They're entry points into a much needed interconnected approach to justice making. David mentioned climate change and how it disproportionately impacts people with disabilities. As more places on this earth become uninhabitable, who gets to leave? Who has no other choice but to stay? Priska Matthew is the last person that we're going to meet today. Priska lives along the coast of Nigeria, where methane gas from a petrochemical plant flares less than 30 feet from her home. No one chooses to live there. She and her neighbors have nowhere else to go and no way to get there. In areas devastated by environmental and climate catastrophe, those who are left behind are often the elderly and people with disabilities. Here's how Priska describes her home. She says, "The rain comes down as black liquid. We don't drink the water any longer, and we don't use it for bathing because it irritates the skin. Everyone's eyes burn from the fumes, and some have actually gone blind. The conditions worsen every year." As bad as this is, there is some hope. As aid agencies and governments and scientists are finally addressing the links between disability and environmental degradation and poverty, people are finally beginning to realize the distinct threats at those intersections. There is so much more to learn, and there's so much more to share with each other. Today was just one of many conversations we're going to be having this year as we consider becoming certified by the Unitarian Universalist Association as a church committed to access, inclusion, and justice. I hope you will please make plans to join a continuing dialogue just 2 weeks from today, Sunday, August the 29th at 5 p.m. The Accessibility Task Force is hosting an online webinar featuring two very special guests from the UUA. One is the president of the UU Mental Health Network, and the other is the administrator for the UU Accessibility and Inclusion Ministry. I hope to see you there. Until then, may we have faith enough in tomorrow to do the wise planting required of us today. May we be bold in bringing to light the brilliant dreams of human kinship and justice. So may it be. Amen. Ashe. Blessed be.
Ours is a welcoming community where we find connection, a spiritual community where we find meaning. Ours is a sharing community where our joys are amplified, a caring community where our sorrows are lessened. We take this moment to reflect on our joys and sorrows and acknowledge the mutual support of our community. The chat function is now open so that you can share with others.
Thank you all for sharing your hopes and your dreams, your joys and your sorrows. Oh, great mystery. Oh, eternal love. Oh, spirit of life. Oh my goodness, another week of incredibly high COVID numbers, another week of smoke and heat, another week of uncertainty, stress, and traumas revisited. O mystery, O eternal love. Before the wonders of life, we acknowledge our failures to see and to revere. Before the sanctities of life, we confess our disrespect and our indignity. Before all the amazing gifts of life, we own that we have not always chosen the lesser good, the greater good, Here today, we seek the gifts of the Spirit and pledge to use them to bless the world. Today, we come before the altar of life to lay down what is in our hearts. And I want to start by announcing a sadness. We mourn the loss of one of our members, the Reverend Charles Chuck Reinhardt, who served as a UU minister from 1952 to 1992. And he died this past Monday, surrounded by his loved ones. We remember Chuck. I want to acknowledge everyone who has added to the chat your amazing gratitude for the beauty in life, even as it lies right next to the heartbreaks. And so for all these spoken and unspoken truths of our hearts, we are so very grateful. Amen.
Please join us in singing hymn number 123, Spirit of Life, once in Spanish and once in English.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
If you lit a chalice at home, let's go ahead and extinguish that flame together. But certainly not the light of love, the warmth of this community, or the strength of commitment. These we hold in our hearts until we are together again. There have been so many gratitudes in the chat today for the musicians. We've had a bounty of musicians, including Linda, surprise, surprise, singing at the end there. So the most beautiful sentiment that came through in that chat is that it's so clear that with all of our musicians, that it starts from your hearts and then it moves out from there. And so it's not only beautiful musically, but it's just such a beautiful expression of your spirit. So thank you, all of our wonderful musicians today, and for our special guest preachers, Kitty and David today. Thank you. Next Sunday, we're going to consider the lives of this nation's and the state's first peoples. And so I'm going to send you off into this day and into your week with this blessing attributed to the Navajo Indians. May blessing and beauty go before you. May beauty follow behind you. May beauty hover above you and below you. May you be surrounded by beauty all the days of your life. Go in peace, my friends. Go in love.